Worries over a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine that are no longer worries of an imminent Russian invasion of Ukraine. The White House says that it will no longer use the word imminent to describe what Russia may be planning with its more than 100,000 soldiers positioned along the border with Ukraine. Now, this is important because words matter. They matter even more when you and your allies are supposed to be reading and speaking from the same page. And that is precisely what has not been happening. U.S. President Biden has predicted that Putin will decide to launch an invasion. But just this week, we heard from the U.S. ambassador to the UN that an attack is not imminent. This shift in language is overdue for some European allies, including the Ukrainian president, who has told Washington to tone down the rhetoric for fear that it could be creating a situation more so than describing one. That said, there appears to be agreement that keeping up the pressure on Putin is the best way to deter war.
Mr. Chairman, I believe President Putin will blink. I think Presidents Biden and Zelensky are staring him down successfully. Putin appears for now to be seeking negotiations. The strong measures taken by Ukraine, NATO, and the United States appear to have deterred an invasion, at least for now. However, until Mr. Putin withdraws the large military force from Ukraine's borders and sends it back to normal duty stations, we should continue to take the strong steps that seem to have deterred an invasion so far.
So we should be very careful about the idea of this being a bluff, but I know that many of our allies are a bit skeptical about what they see is happening. So, in the larger strategic context, which I think my colleagues and I have already laid out, we need to keep this up. We need to keep up our response as if we're taking this absolutely 100% seriously. Call the bluff, as you were, because, you know, in past practice, Putin often hasn't bluffed and has done something.
Well, my first guest tonight has used several words to describe U.S. foreign policy in Ukraine and Russia, including the words not sane. Lawrence Wilkerson is a retired U.S. Army colonel and served as Chief of Staff to U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell from 2002 until Powell's resignation in 2005. He joins me tonight from Falls Church, Virginia. Mr. Wilkerson, it's good to have you on the program tonight. And I don't want to steal your thunder here, so how is U.S. foreign policy regarding Ukraine and Russia, at least in the last 20 years, not sane?
I think the fundamental reason, and the reason that I would describe it that way with a lot more than Ukraine, expansion in general, for example, is Article 5. The reason NATO is arguably one of the most successful, if not the most successful, political and military alliance in human history is Article 5. I don't think you're going to find too many treaty commitments, even after Westphalia, that have that kind of commitment in them. Now we are launching operations in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq with NATO partners. Article 5? An attack on one is an attack on all. Every country, all 30, well, all 29 others, will come to the aid of the one attack. No American is going to risk nuclear war for Montenegro, nor Latvia, nor Estonia, or Lithuania, let alone Ukraine. This is insanity.
Do you think that NATO should guarantee in writing to Russia that Ukraine will never join NATO, or that NATO will stop expanding eastward?
Can't now, because it's become too much of an issue with us, and prestige is at stake, unfortunately. I think what we're hearing right now, what I'm hearing right now, that we are recognizing Vladimir Putin's genuine concerns about ballistic missile defense launchers that could be cruise missile, nuclear-tipped cruise missile launchers, and put Moscow and other targets in Russia under extraordinary duress because of the short warning time. I think that's the real issue here. And I think we can back off that. I think we can talk and we can diplomatically deal, and we can say ultimately, okay, we're not putting any BMD launchers in Ukraine, maybe not anywhere in Ukraine, but certainly not anywhere that would be really dangerous for the Russians. So I think that's the issue, and I think that's what we're dealing with, and I hope it is. And I think we can find a solution around that.
Well, I mean, could we reach, let's call it an understanding between Washington and Moscow that there will be no further expansion? I mean, I guess you're talking about, trusting each other. And is there any trust reservoirs we can dip into at this point?
Well, you go back to my time. It seems like eons ago now, but when Edward Shevardnadze and Mikhail Gorbachev and Jim Baker and George H.W. Bush were talking, Colin Powell was involved. Colin Powell was in Warsaw instructing the previous Warsaw Pact General Officer Corps in how to work in a democracy. Those were halcyon times. They were great times. We were talking about Russia being a partner in NATO, ultimately even possibly being a member of NATO. Where it went astray was William Jefferson Clinton and the beginning of political opportunity in expanding NATO and getting everybody titillated about it, including the nuclear weapons complex, including the military-industrial complex, making money off selling aircraft to Poland and every other country we could bring into it. So it got out of hand. It got terribly out of hand. But that demonstration of comity, that demonstration of cooperation and so forth that existed in 91, 92, 93, it could be brought back if cooler heads would prevail.
Well, let's go back to 1991 for a moment. We had the U.S. Secretary of State, James Baker. He spent a couple of weeks in Europe at the time that the Partnership for Peace initiative was being discussed. And as I understand it, this would have been an incremental, gradual plan for achieving NATO membership that would also have taken Russia's security concerns into consideration. Now, what I've read is that Mr. Baker, he liked the idea, but when he got back to Washington, President Bush told him, I'm nixing that. Is that one of the biggest failings right there with how we've been handling Russia?
Well, I wasn't in the room if that occurred, but I did get a debrief almost every time that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff came back from a National Security Council meeting, Colin Powell, and those debriefs were pretty thorough, and nothing like that ever was debriefed to me. And I can't imagine that Colin would have kept that from me had it actually happened, because he was ecstatic. He was euphoric that not only had the Cold War ended, but he was going to Vienna to lecture Warsaw Pact generals. He was talking with Warsaw Pact generals about how NATO was going to be a partner with them, and that in the future, perhaps even some of them could be members of NATO. Could they meet all the requirements? Actually, the requirements for being a member of NATO are rougher than the requirements of being a member of the European Union, if you look at them closely. All about democratic governance, lack of corruption, and so forth and so on. And if you applied all those requirements, none of the new people we've let in would have been let in. I guarantee you.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, though, where, and it sounds like it was in the 1990s, where is it, though, that we lost this, this unique opportunity to change NATO, to change the definition of NATO and to bring Russia in, take advantage of the changes of the early 90s, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and to have peace in our time. Where did we lose that grand opportunity?
Well, this is what I teach, and you're asking me about things I really do know the details of. Not only do I teach it, I was there. I took the Marine Corps War College seminar when I was director of the War College to Bill Perry's office, the Secretary of Defense for Bill Clinton. And we had hour-long sessions with him. He was as euphoric and as genuinely pleased about what was happening as Colin Powell had been before. And so was his general, Saakashvili. What happened was in the second election that Bill Clinton had some difficulty, he thought, getting reelected in, he needed some political opportunities that showed his bona fides in foreign policy, too. So he began thinking about changing what had been a very slow, incremental, you say it's okay, we say it's okay process into a slam bang, let's go. And all of a sudden, NATO expansion became one of his number one foreign policy objectives. And it just took off. And it's been going ever since. And as I said, it's led to an insane situation. 30 countries in NATO. There is no American out there in the hustings who understands what's going on first, But second, when they're told that they are committed to nuclear warfare for some of these countries they couldn't even find on a map,
Yeah.
NATO's not going to last much longer than that.
Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Wilkerson. You served in the Bush administration, the second Bush. I want to make sure we get that right, which took the U.S. to war in Iraq. The trust that was broken here in Europe, that lingers to this very day. We see it in our reporting here all the time when we're talking about foreign policy. There's this suspicion that the U.S. wants war or that its end game is to have a perpetual conflict demanding the production of weapons. Is there validity to that suspicion?
There certainly is within a certain group of oligarchs, I'll call them that. That's what they are in this country. And I suspect elsewhere, too, there is that inclination and there's that desire. You know, I was there when George W. Bush essentially used the F word with Schroeder in the Oval Office. My boss came back and debriefed me on that one. Mm-hmm. And from that moment on, Schroeder hated Bush and Bush hated Schroeder. And Joschka Fischer and Colin Powell under the table trading cooking instruments to Joschka and German beer to Powell at midnight sometimes in his office kept the German-American relationship together. Mm-hmm. But it was very tortuous, very difficult. But we have started. I remember when Colin turned to me in 1989, the youngest four-star general in the Army, just promoted, and he said to me, musing, you know, Francois Mitterrand will be gone, Helmut Kohl will be gone. There are going to be no leaders very soon in Europe whose feet are in the war. Yeah. That's when the transatlantic link will begin to fray badly and finally sever. Well, what he said was accurate.
Well, who are these oligarchs today? Can you give me names?
The CEO of Lockheed Martin, the CEO of Boeing, the CEO of Raytheon, the CEO of Grumman, the people who run the complex.
But why can't members of Congress stand up to them, though, Mr. Wilkerson? I mean, you know, what you're saying, it's not completely new. But, you know, maybe it's a little bit of naivete here in this question. But, you know, what about the elected members in the United States? Can't they stand up and say, no, this is not in the interest of our national security?
That's an excellent question. Ever since Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision that essentially declared corporate money just like people's money, that is to say corporations are human beings under the law, we have had such a pollution of money in our political process that the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, all the members of the committee, all congressmen and senators who work anywhere near defense, if they're not of the Progressive Caucus or whatever and just committed to cut the budget, are for the budget. Look at what just happened. $768 billion, and someone wanted to stick another 25 or 30 and will, mark my words, we'll stick another 30 to $50 billion on it before the fiscal year is out. And this is killing the military. It's so polluting. There's no more imagination in the Pentagon because they fix every problem by throwing billions of dollars at it. And by the way, they lose about 10% of that money every time they throw it at a new project.
Yeah, we hear that all the time. And what you're saying, you know, it certainly rings true here, according to what we've heard. I've got a minute maximum left. I want to ask you, with Ukraine, the U.S. and NATO, they're saying we've got to call his bluff. We've got to keep pressuring Putin. If we do that, he will not invade Ukraine. Do you believe that?
I don't think he's going to invade. I think he's a master chess player. He reminds me of the original leader of the NKVD, Beria, for Stalin, Beria. He's shrewd. He's very shrewd. I don't think he wants war. I don't think the Russian people want war. And I don't think the Ukrainians want war. They don't want their country to look like Syria. They just don't. So I think all these pressures are going to work. But I think we're going to be the ones who are going to have to offer this, as I said before, this fairly substantial commitment to not putting anything that would make Putin's military feel really dicey close to their borders.
All right, Mr. Lawrence Wilkerson, we gave you a little bit more than 10 minutes. We kept our word. I hope you come back and talk with us again. It was great getting your incredible insights. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who knows a thing or two about problematic relationships, says he could act as a mediator to defuse tensions over Russia's troop buildup along its border with Ukraine. Erdogan made the offer at a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy in Kyiv today and proposed Turkey host talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Erdogan has made this offer before, but Moscow is angered over Turkey's supply of combat drones going to Kyiv. Shortly before the visit, Turkish intelligence abducted a Turkish arms dealer turned whistleblower in Ukraine. Now, that allegedly with the complicity of Ukrainian authorities. DW Investigations has this report on the case.
This is Nuri Gökhan Bozkır, once an elite Turkish commando, then an arms dealer on the run, now abducted and paraded by the Turkish state.
Our intelligence found that this person was hiding in Ukraine. And we talked to President Zelensky about him being caught and being brought to our country.
But who is Nuri Gökhan Bozkır, and why is his capture so important to President Erdogan? According to information collected by DW, Bozkır is a whistleblower and could unveil systematic wrongdoing by the Turkish government because he was an integral part of its covert weapons shipments. He says he spent years buying weapons that Turkey's intelligence service would then deliver to militants in Syria. Shipments worth millions of dollars. Payment was often made in cash. One of his leaked videos shows suitcases filled with money. It appears that Bozkır fell out of favor when he attempted a delivery without the Turkish intelligence. Fearing for his life, he fled to Ukraine, where he first started leaking documents. In 2019, Turkey requested his extradition for involvement in a 2002 murder. Bozkır's lawyer says the evidence is weak.
There is no direct evidence of his involvement in this murder. I think Turkey wanted to have him back as quickly as possible or to silence him in some way.
Bozkır is not the first to be targeted for disclosing Turkish arms transfers to battlefields in the region. Turkish journalist Can Dündar broke the news when he published a video of a clandestine arms transfer intended for militant groups in Syria. A revelation that nearly cost his life and forced him into exile.
This is standard practice of Turkish government. Silence those who bring to light to state's dirty deeds. So those who in power knows very well that Bozkır is one of the black boxes of this corrupted system. And when this black box is opened, all their filth will be exposed.
When Turkish authorities upped the pressure for his extradition, Bozkır went into hiding. How the Turkish intelligence service was able to track him down and abduct him remains unclear. His lawyer believes Ukrainian security agencies helped, although his extradition hearing was pending.
If they knew where Bozkır was, they should have brought him to court. The court would have handed down a verdict. That would have been the right procedure. But they decided otherwise and instead offered a gift to Turkey.
The Ukrainian government did not respond to a request for comment. Several inquiries to the Turkish government also remain unanswered. Yet President Erdogan is using Bozkır's case to send a clear message.
I would like to take this opportunity to address the traitors who continue their terrorist activities by collaborating with dark circles in the countries they have fled to. Wherever you go in the world, you will not be able to escape from the Turkish justice system. You will be held to account.
Can Dündar is familiar with such threats and he won't be intimidated by them. But he is worried about Bozkır. The arms dealer, once in favor with the Turkish state, is now being interrogated by Ankara's counter-terrorism unit. Dündar doubts he will receive a fair trial.